The Witch in the Wood by T.H. White, Chapter 7. In Caerleon, far from all these problems, everything was at sixes and sevens in preparation for war. Merlin had made several brilliant suggestions about the way to win it, but as these entailed an exciting ambush with secret aid from abroad, they had to be kept dark. Lot's army was so much more numerous than the king's that it had been necessary to resort to stratagems, and the way the battle was going to be fought was a close secret which was known only to 4 people. The common citizens, who were in ignorance of the higher policy, nevertheless had a great deal to do. There were pikes to be ground to a fine edge, so that all the grindstones in the town were roaring day and night. There were thousands of arrows to be dressed, so that there were lights in the Fletchers' houses at all hours, and the unfortunate geese on the commons were continually being chased about by excited yeomen who wanted feathers. The royal peacocks were as bare as an old broom, as most of the crack shots liked to have what Chaucer calls peacock arrows. They were more classy, and the smell of boiling glue rose to high heaven. The armorers accomplishing the knights hammered away with their musical clinks, working double shifts at it, and the blacksmiths shod all the chargers, and the nuns never stopped knitting comforters for the soldiers, or making the kind of bandages which were called tents. King Lot had already arrived at the rendezvous in Bedegraine. One day, the King of England painfully climbed the 208 steps which led to the door of Merlin's tower room and knocked upon the door. The magician was inside with his familiar owl, Archimedes, sitting on the back of his chair, and he was trying to find the square root of -1. He had forgotten how to do it. "Merlin," said Arthur, panting rather, "I want to talk to you." Merlin immediately closed his book with a bang, leaped to his feet, seized his wand of lignum vitae, and rushed at the king as if he were trying to shoo away a stray chicken. Go away, shouted Merlin. "What are you doing here? What do you mean by it? Aren't you the King of England? Go away and send for me. Get out of my room. I never heard of such a thing. You're the king. Go away and send for me at once." "But I'm here now," said Arthur. "No, you're not," retorted Merlin resourcefully, and he pushed the king out the door, slamming it in his face. "Well," said Arthur, and he went off sadly down the 208 stairs. An hour later, Merlin presented himself in the royal chamber in answer to a summons which had been delivered by a page. "That's better," said Merlin, and sat down comfortably on a carpet chest. "Stand up, please," said Arthur coolly, and clapped his hands for a page to take away the seat. Merlin stood up, boiling with indignation. The whites of his knuckles stood out as he clenched them. "About our conversation on the subject of chivalry," began Arthur in an airy tone. "I don't recollect such a conversation." "No? I've never been so insulted in my life." "But I'm the king, you know," said Arthur. "You can't sit down in front of the king." "Rubbish!" Arthur began to laugh more than was seemly, and his foster brother, Sir Kay, and his old guardian, Sir Ector, came out from behind the throne where they had been hiding. Kay took off Merlin's hat and put it on Sir Ector, and Sir Ector said, "Well, bless my soul! Now I'm a nigromancer! Hocus pocus!" Then everybody began laughing with the king, including Merlin, and seats were sent for so that they could sit down, and some bottles of wine were opened so that it should not be a dry meeting. "You see," said the king proudly, "I have summoned a council." There was a pause here, for it was the first time that Arthur had ever made a speech, and he wanted to collect his wits for it. "Well then," said the king, "it is about chivalry. I want to talk about it." Merlin was immediately watching him with bright eyes, and you could see that he had become so excited he could hardly sit still. His old knobbly fingers fluttered about, making the stars and secret signs of his gown, or among the stars and secret signs of his gown. But he would not say anything to help the speaker, although he was in torment himself. He might say that this moment was the critical one in all the magician's career, the moment toward which he had been living backwards for heaven knows how many centuries, and now he was to know for certain whether he had lived in vain. "I've been thinking," said Arthur, "about might and right. I don't think things ought to be done just because you are able to do them. I think they should be done because you ought to do them. That's quite plain, isn't it?" Nobody answered. "Well, I was talking to Merlin on the battlements one day, and he mentioned that the last battle we had, in which 700 men were killed, was not so much fun as I had thought it was. Of course, battles aren't very much fun when you come to think about them. I mean, people ought not to be killed, ought they? It is so nice to be alive. Merlin made a silent clapping with his thumbnails, but he did not let the king see. Very well, then, resumed Arthur. But the funny thing was that old Merlin was helping me to win battles. He is still helping me, for that matter, and we hope to win the Battle of Bedegraine together when it comes off. Amen, said Sir Ector. That was inconsistent. Why did he help me fight battles if they were bad things? There was no answer from anybody, and the king began to speak with agitation. I could only think, said Arthur, beginning to blush furiously, I could only think that he wanted me to win them for a certain reason. He paused and looked at Merlin, who turned his head away. The reason was Merlin? The reason was that if I could be the master of my own kingdom by winning these few battles, I could stop them altogether afterwards, and also do something about this business of might. Now, Merlin, have I guessed? Merlin, was I right? Merlin did not turn his head around, but his hands lay quite still in his lap. I was right, exclaimed Arthur. I thought it alone. And he began talking so quickly that he could hardly keep up with himself. You see, he said, might isn't right, but there is an awful lot of might in the world, and something has got to be done about it. It is as if people were half horrible and half nice. Perhaps they are even more than half horrible, and when they are left to themselves, they run wild. You get the average baron that we see nowadays, people like Sir Bruce Sans Pitai, who simply go clod-hopping round the world, dressed in steel and doing exactly what they please. Then the horrible side goes uppermost, and there is thieving and rape and plunder and torture. The people become beasts. But you see, Merlin is helping me to win my battles so that I can stop his. He wants me to bind might. Lot and Uriens and Anguish and those. They are the old world, the old-fashioned order, who seek their private will. I have got to vanquish them with their own weapons. They force it upon me, for they live by force. And then the real work begins. This little battle at Bedegraine is the preliminary, you see. It is after the battle that Merlin is wanting me to think about. Arthur paused again for comment and encouragement, but the magician's face was still turned away. It was only Sir Ector, who was sitting next to him, who could see his eyes. Now, what I have thought, said Arthur, is this. Why can't you harness might so that it works for right? I know it sounds awful bosh, but I mean you can't just say there isn't such a thing. The might is there in the bad half of people, and you can't neglect it. You can't cut it out, but you might be able to divert it, if you see what I mean, so that it was useful instead of bad. The audience was deeply interested now, and all leaned forward except Merlin. My idea is that if we can only win this battle in front of us and get a firm hold of the country, then I will institute a sort of order of chivalry. I won't punish the bad knights or hang Lot, but I will try to get them into our order. We shall have to make it a great honor, you know, and make it fashionable and all that. Everybody must want to be in it, and then I shall make the oath of the order that might is only to be used for right. Do you see? All my knights in my order will ride all over the world, still dressed in steel and whacking away with their swords. That will give an outlet for the wanting to whack, you see. But they will be bound to strike only on behalf of what is good, to defend virgins against Cerberus, and to restore what has been done wrong in the past, and to help the oppressed and so forth. Do you follow the idea? It will be using the might instead of fighting against it, and turning a bad thing into a good. There, Merlin, it's all I can say. I have thought as hard as I could, and I suppose I'm wrong as usual. But I did think, Merlin, and alone. I can't do any better. Oh, Merlin, please say something. What Merlin did say was this. He stood up in front of them most dramatically, so that they could all see that he was quite upset, and he stretched out his arms in both directions, looking at the ceiling, and he said, Lord, now let us, thou servant, depart in peace, for mine eyes have seen thy salvation. And that's the end of chapter 7.